So in this tutorial, we're going to have a look at the brand new drum synth with inside Logic Pro X 10.5. This brand new version of Logic that just dropped yesterday. It's a free update for all people who've got Logic 10. It's all here now, and it's pretty glorious from what I've seen so far. It comes with a new Ableton Live style non-linear performance composing and kind of editing station here on the left. And on the right hand side, we kind of have that traditional sort of linear editor that we all know and love. I am going to do some videos and some tutorials on this Ableton Lifestyle part of Logic Pro 10.5, but I need to learn it a little bit myself because it has just dropped yesterday. But one of the things I started playing with yesterday for some quite instant quick gratification was drum synth, and this is kind of I think Apple's response to things like Nicky Romero's Kick 2, things like that, those types of plugins that are out there, that are these just basic kind of drum synths. And it is essentially just a synthesizer. You can kind of hear that with what they're doing in some of the other different modules and different modes, which we'll look at in a bit. But just to start with, on the kicks, we have a bank of selections here where we can choose between different types of drum sounds, starting with kicks, and then you've got sub-variants in here, and when you click on different versions, some of them do come up with different parameters, so it's not just a set of presets based on the kind of drum kick style. They do actually change the interface and change what some of the things do. So got a pretty heavy kind of 808 subby kind of kick thing going on here, which is kind of quite cool. So I'm just going to play my D1 there. I can then change the pitch of that quite dramatically, like it's the main oscillator. I'm guessing the kind of sine wave oscillator that's part of this. We've got a bit of zipper noise on the tone control. Let's add in a bit of top end, a bit of bite at the top there. The shape is controlling the pitch envelope and the pitch shifting during it. So it's like an ADSR type envelope is added to the pitch of the oscillator here, but it's actually just a kind of decay release or attack release envelope. So we don't hear it kind of swell up, we just hear the pitch being modulated down from its highest point down to that low sub there. And then this sweep kind of helps tame some of that stuff. It's kind of a little bit like a filter, really, making it a bit subbier to a bit kind of clickier. The decay will kind of tighten up the envelope, and this is just the amplifier envelope here. So if I want those really big kind of sub bass kind of kicks, I can increase the decay. But if I want more of a kind of fall to the floor kind of housey type thing, I can pull that decay down to reshape the envelope of the sound there. But for this, I kind of like a little bit of that decay there, so I'm going to leave that on for now. We've also got saturation there. It's very kind of clicky at the moment. It's got a lot of zipper noise when we're actually changing through these. I'll be interested to see what happens when we start dialing in some automation, because obviously we don't want that zipper noise as things play, but it's probably just a bug that will get ironed out pretty quickly, I would have thought, as changing things like the decay will be important, and on some of the tone ones as well, it will be important to be able to change some of those over time. So then we've obviously got a volume at the end there, but Apple have done a clever kind of thing. They've made sure that we've got a bit of headroom here, and its default volume of 0 dB. It actually gives you 3 dB of headroom at the channel strip level, which is actually there, so that when we turn up that saturation all the way, kind of got a built-in limiter somewhere in the plugin, I think, because that much saturation added on top of that should kind of overload that by a couple of dB, but I think it's built in, it's kind of baked in. As it saturates, it also kind of has some inbuilt limiting, which is quite cool and quite good. It means we don't have to worry about too many plugins on the top to do with compression and limiting, etc., to kind of make sure we don't overload at the channel strip level. The punchy kicks, the shape Again, that's a pitch envelope type thing happening on there. The rest of the controls, punch is really kind of adding in, I think, probably just a second oscillator. Some sort of FM modulation on some other oscillator to give you a kind of basically like a click level. So you've got your sub and your click essentially making up the low end of a kick drum, and the high kind of transient part here I think is essentially what that punch is. And again, the saturation there. Mono is an interesting thing that's on all of them. It doesn't mean monophonic, although I'm sure the drum synth probably is. But when we put it into poly, if I put my MIDI keyboard up a few octaves, it means we can actually play chords, play polyphonically. When that key tracking really struggles up there. But with this key tracking switched on, it does mean that we can actually play chromatically with this kind of drum synth. So we can actually play chords and fully polyphonically with that key tracking on. If I take key tracking off, I'm pressing other MIDI keyboard, pressing other MIDI notes, and it will play polyphonically. It will let me play 2 or 3 notes at the same time as I'm playing that on my MIDI keyboard, but we don't hear the pitch of them changing. So that is just adding volume, and it is just overloading there. And it's probably, if we do, I would imagine at some point, yeah, just overloads if you go too low anyway. I'd imagine anything below C1 will start to kind of overload and clip a little bit. But that's the punch kicks. The air one, again, similar kind of stuff. And then we've got noise here, which again is just white noise with a kind of ADSR envelope over it to make it very clicky, to make it like the beater hitting a real acoustic kick drum. And the snap as well, adding again a little bit of kind of pitch enveloped oscillator. If I turn, my sound's gone a bit funny there. Oh, it's not liking that. Adding the noise back in. So I'm not going to go through all of the different variants and every single control in there. A lot of them are the same. Dirt is obviously some sort of distortion and saturator, and again there'll be slightly different variants of what's going on in here in these portions, but I will come back to some of them later once we kind of get going with some of these different sounds and these different kind of modes, mainly because I want to actually show a secondary feature that's really going to be really useful in conjunction with the drum synth. So we're going to need a few different tracks of this, but one of the new things which we have in Logic Pro 10.5 is this new step sequencer. And to start with, you kind of don't really get it as a key command or as an editor. It just starts here because it's actually a different type of region. It's more akin to this new Ableton Live style sequencing in Logic that we get here. Not the step sequencer itself, but how it kind of plays forward and backwards, and some of these things is more geared to this live performance. So if I create a MIDI region here, and if I stretch that out for this little 4-bar loop, and I open up the editor in the normal way, I don't actually get the step sequencer option by default, which is kind of a little bit annoying that this isn't fully kind of integrated and fully kind of working in a way that would be most sensible. What you actually have to do is control click and create a pattern region. We have this step sequencer mode where we can literally sequence in against a grid defined here is however many steps we want, 16th notes. If you want it 24 divisions, that means we've kind of got triplets in the mix there, but 16 steps is going to be more kind of useful for what I'm about to do. And I'm just going to sequence these notes here, and it says the root, the pitch of this note, which is going to be really important in the drum stuff, is actually G1. And because we have, just have the drum synth hidden up there, because we do have key tracking on, this is going to make a difference. So I wanted it to be D1, so I have to go and click on this position here where it says root key. I need to go to notes, and then I need to click and select D1 for it to change the pitch. and now it's a little bit low. It's a fourth down technically. So I've now got this here, and if I play this, it will just play that pattern and loop it round and round and round. So this is going to become interesting later on when we have a look at this kind of mode, because we can put in within our sequences, we can just drag and drop a kind of performance mode there, and we can change up our sequences afterwards by duplicating these and chucking them in, etc. But we'll ignore that fun stuff for now, and I'll add in another drum synth part. By default, when you load this up without a plugin installed, it actually gives you an octave from C2 to C3. It just gives you a C major scale, basically, with the octave up there at the top for that eighth note, and it gives you a grid where we can click and drag and draw in this stuff and kind of sequence notes in that manner. Now I'm going to undo that because that's going to sound dreadful. Let's undo that, and let's just put in a pattern mode here and load up drum synth. So for this, I'm going to want snares and claps. So I've got my pitches there already kind of determined for me, but I'm going to have it as D2 to keep it roughly in key. That playing there for a sec. If we change the view, I think because I created the track before having a drum synth plugin in there, it has given me that octave version. I don't know how we can kind of collapse that to show only the ones used, but there's my snare pattern. So I'm just going to get out of the editor there, make a new drum synth plugin for some hi-hats, and now if I go to create a pattern, it just gives me that single key option here. Again, I'm going to change that to some sort of D pitch, maybe D2. We'll see how that goes, and add in some hi-hats. So I'm just going to add in a smooth hi-hat pattern. Ooh, that's a bit ziggy there at the top. So I'm just going to push in that pattern there. So here we have the hi-hat pattern then sequenced in as well. And I'm going to just use this, I'm just going to solo this for a sec. Because this is going to be one of the first points where I show you a very kind of cool thing about this sequencing style of drum sequencing here in Logic Pro 10.5. So we actually get a play direction. So everything so far, the kick and snare pattern have been relatively basic. I've added in a few little rhythmic variations here with the hi-hat patterns, but what you can choose to happen is actually get the direction of this step sequence to play backwards as well as forwards, which in that instance doesn't sound that good. Change that up and have it going bi-directional, so it can kind of ping pong between these two values. You can also get it to do it randomly, and then it's just going to randomly choose a step in this step sequence, which could be useful for some things, but I'm going to just keep that going backwards and forwards there now, and then I'm going to start adding in a percussion track as well. So I'm going to get rid of that step sequencer, because if I create the track already, it adds in all those extra bits, which I don't really want for the purposes of this demo. So here we go, another drum synth part, and this time I'm going to add in some percussion. Got the deep toms here, some little kind of clicky stuff. Very much an 80s style cowbell, that electronic one, from taking its inspiration from things like the Roland 808 and 909. Going to try and get that D2 note and a D3 note here in the sequence. So I'm going to right click again, or control click, and go create a pattern region, and I'm going to change that root key again. I'm going to change that first one to D2, and I'm going to add in a note, and I'm going to add in D3. And I can rearrange those, so I've now got those in octaves. So and then let's add in a part. And if we add that back in, and what's quite interesting when you add in patterns like this, again, it's not the greatest pattern here to start with, but if we start adding in this forwards and backwards play, the way it goes through the sequencer, it should add some interesting variety to that kind of drum part, which is just way cooler. Having this kind of mirror image function, it's just way cooler than just having everything linear and everything going in one direction the whole time. And I think this is really where Logic 10.5 has really made some really kind of valuable improvements, even in some kind of standard kind of MIDI sequencing. This is kind of much more interesting, exciting, and easier to do than to do the same function in the piano roll. And if we did want to change this up and actually change and convert this to a MIDI region, it not only puts in the pattern, but it puts in the pattern backwards and forwards. So it already does this for you when you convert it to MIDI. So this puts in that mirror image of this here. If we see from bar 3 onwards, we can see that bar 3 is a mirror image of bar 2. Bar 4 is again a mirror image of bar 1. Which is just absolutely wicked. We can't kind of convert that back to there's no converting it back to that step sequencer style, and that gets blocked out on here as an option as soon as we change it back into MIDI. But if we do press Command Z or Apple Z for the old school people, you can get back to that version. You can get back to this style of editor to carry on editing and make new patterns, etc., or make variants to it here. So I'm just going to solo this a sec while I sort out some of the key features on here. And I think one of them is the fact that it's C3. So I'm going to change the pitch of that. I'm actually going to put that up an octave and put it onto the D, so everything's kind of in key because of this key tracking feature. So here we go. I've got the ride here. I'm going to take that decay up there, bring the volume down a touch again. But this dissonance is interesting because it's, to my ears, it's very much not a full dissonance that you would get a need for these kind of bell tones and metallic sounds to create those inharmonics, but it's actually, it sounds more like FM synthesis to get some of those. It's still quite musical. And even the dissonance still kind of fits in, so I wonder if they are doing that with some clever FM synthesis under the hood and doing some ratios that are still fairly harmonic and fairly musical, even when going from no dissonance, adding in with some kind of bit crushing in there just for good measure under the hood, I would guess. So let's hear that with the rest of the... So I'm going to have to add in or change the notes here and change it from G1, which is just far too low for percussion like this. So I'm going to change it to the Ds again, and I'm going to start with D4. But I'm also going to add in an additional note here, a different pitch. Again, I'm going to go for a G this time. So root and fifth, and I'm going to go for G4 as well. I'm going to retitle that. If we click on there, it plays the sound. So let's have that with the rest of the pattern here. So it's all still a bit of a mess in terms of the mix level here. But one of the things about this. Let's just put the snare and the membrane back on. We can actually test out moving the whole sequence across in a division. So we're not changing, we're not writing in a new pattern per se, but we're just nudging it along. So I'm going to get back to that original one, and I'm just going to try out. So it's a really kind of cool way to come up with some interesting rhythms without having to rewrite everything in the piano roll. And I think this is one of the real values of the step sequences style of drum programming. One thing I will go back in and have a little look at with the hi-hat parts, because it's slightly busier, we haven't really looked at the idea of adding in articulations to these. So if you hit this disclosure triangle, you can actually have a gate, which won't really make much of a difference here because they're kind of one-shot triggers, I think, from the synth. So yeah, changing the note length doesn't make any difference there. That's what the gate function is. Whether we want to tie it and make it longer, again, isn't going to make sense here because these are just one-shot rhythmic values. But if we wanted to not play in 16th but play in 8th notes, for example, we could tie it to make that step longer. Just undo that there. But one thing we will get here is the velocity sensitive nature, which in drum synth makes a big difference, as we can kind of see. So it doesn't only change the volume, but it also changes the articulation and the tone. So I might make these ones change up like that, and do the same for the kicks maybe. So let's maybe make do the same for some of these. It just makes them more dynamic and more kind of interesting. So it's just solo in a single layer, or muting them as well, which is kind of cool.